Hello, I'm Stephanie Vanderslice, and I teach at UCA. I direct the MFA program there. We have a lot of fun. I encourage you to check us out. And I'm going to talk about final editing today, which, there's some tricks to know about it, so that's good. I want to talk to you, first I want to tell you I'm the author of The Geek's Guide to the Writing Life, which is it's called a memoir. An instructional memoir for the rest of us is the subtitle. And it's really for anyone who wants to write and feels like, oh, I can't be a writer, I have this full-time job, I have a family, how am I going to do all that? This is really to inspire people who want to do that and sort of give you some tools as to how. And you can order it anywhere, but it's also in the stacks. I checked yesterday. The last time I was here. So anyway, you can get it out of the library. But there's lots of stuff in here about writing. And I'm a writing geek. I am a writing geek. And I'm not a famous writer, but I've been able to publish my work, which makes me happy as a writing geek. And so, it's kind of like how you can too, even if you're a geek like me. I also have a novel coming out it's coming out March 15th, called The Lost Son. And I will be having pre-orders and information about dates. I'm definitely gonna have a reading here when it's out and have it for sale and those kind of things. So if you're interested in being on my mailing list and finding out about those things, I'm gonna pass this around. If you could just put your name and email on it if you're interested. Okay, so that was my little promo spiel. My husband and I have lived in Conway for 24 years and have really enjoyed it here. And it's a good place, I think, to be a writer. There are lots of writers here. You'd be surprised. So the first thing I put up here on this thing about final editing is something that I saw on Twitter last week, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's perfect. God grant me the confidence and perseverance of a typo that's made it through 45 rounds of edits. And if you work in writing any amount of time at all, it's amazing how this can happen. I mean, people will say, so many eyes looked at this. How could that one typo have made it? But it does, it's amazing. So editing is something you have to work really hard on and do a lot of, but you also have to understand that there's just going to be those ones that somehow they get through. You just want, you want to cut that down to as low as you can, but they're going to get through. So I'm just going to go through my handout. So these are just thoughts and resources about editing your work. So let me talk first about revising. Shelley Connor did a great presentation on revising. I cannot emphasize enough what she was saying. And first of all, her system is great. The fact that she talked about layering in things, and that's so, so true. So you have to spend a lot of time revising, more time than you probably realize. You want to revise and revise. It's about making the manuscript better. Look, I left out an L. So talk about editing. And I've read this like a few times. By looking at structure, form, shape, plotting, characterization, making sure you've built in all the layers that Shelley talked about. And basically, revision is big picture. And it's also kind of big picture changes. Like, you might choose to get rid of a character. I've done that plenty of times. Or put two characters together, or add a character, or change the beginning, change which chapter you start at the beginning with. Those are big changes. Those are what they call global changes. And that's what you spend a lot of time doing in the revision. Your book might change a lot during this process. So give yourself that time and don't beat yourself up too much about the time it may take for you to do that revision. My novel that's coming out in March, I started writing seriously in 2009. Finished it in National Novel Writing Month in 2009. Revised for about a year and a half. I talk about that a lot in the book. Revised that for like a year and a half. Went to Derry Hollow, which is a great writing retreat place and not that expensive. And if you want to go there to work on your writing, email me. I should have put my email on this. Email me, because if you know someone who went there when you apply, and they can recommend you, it helps you get in. It's not that hard to get in. I think they just want to know that you're not going to disturb other people and that you really are going to do work. So anyway, so I was at Derry Hollow when I really did what I thought was like, all right, this is the revision. This is the revision that's going to really bring it together. And I felt like it really did. So that was 2011. So I spent all of 2011 editing. I'm going to talk, and I'll talk about that in a minute, editing, because I had done all the revisions. Then I sent, I went looking for agents in 2012. And I got my agent in 2012. Then my agent, it was only 50,000 words then, which is not really that long. And she said, I have ideas for you to develop this a lot more. And her ideas were great. She was a former editor. A lot of editors become agents because actually, believe it or not, more and more in traditional publishing, it's the agent who can really develop a writer and develop a relationship with them. So she took me through several more revisions of this novel, and she took it up to 68,000 words. That's a lot of development. I mean, she gave me ideas and stuff like that. She really knew what she was doing. She's a boutique agent in the sense that she doesn't represent a lot of people, and she's not like a big name agent, but she's been really good for me. So anyway, I did that with her. And then it went on submission. She put it on submission to an A-list. And I think A-list meant the most suited editors. And publishers nobody bit. Then she said, okay, but you get a lot of responses that way. And guess what? Everybody tells you people in publishing are going to be terrible, but they're not, because they don't want to insult the agent. So they're really nice. They're like, well, we like this, and this, but we weren't in love with it. They have to be in love with it in order to take it on, because, well, think about it. If you're going to put that much energy and like $50,000 into a book, you really do want to love it. Anyway, so I got a few, the writing is beautiful, blah, blah, but we don't love it. Anyway, so the B list, I got a couple, after the A list, she came back to me and said, okay, so based on the responses, because some people gave a little more feedback than that. Based on the responses that we got, I'm going to give you some suggestions to do another revision, which I did. It was funny because she didn't want me to kill off a character that I had killed off. And she had been wanting this character not to be killed off for a long time. And I was like, no, they have to be. And but we kind of compromised, and I kept this character alive a lot longer than I planned. Anyway, so that was a big revision. So we go to the B list. The B list, we got two nibbles, pretty good nibbles, and a lot of responses. And just to let you know how subjective writing is, not to make you give up on it, because it's always worth doing if you love it, if you're a writing geek. I got one rejection that said, this is not commercial enough. It's too literary. And I was like, okay. And I had gotten some things like that. And then the next one that I got, they seemed really interested in it. And I got this one editor that was really interested, and then she passed it on to her colleague, and the colleague said, it's not commercial enough. I'm sorry, it's too commercial, the opposite. So she said, it's too commercial. And I was like, this other editor at another publisher said it wasn't commercial enough, and you're telling me it's too commercial. And my agent was like, that's just a lesson in how subjective people can be. So anyway, So, okay, all that happens, and then finally, I'm just telling you this to know about the revision process. All that happens, she releases me sort of, she's still my agent, but she says, if you want to try to get a smaller press to publish this, I'm fine with that, but you're going to have to do that on your own because they don't, agents get 15% of your income, but from a small press, they don't get anything. So she wasn't going to go through all the work. She's like, but you go and do this. You might be able to get this published with a smaller press. Well, I did that for like 2 years, and one press called Delphinium. Does anyone know the movie with Whoopi Goldberg from like 20 years ago called Clara's Heart? Well, anyway, the guy who wrote that is now the editor at Delphinium Press. And so I sent it to him. And actually, this time I went through my agent because he said, well, no, I actually do require an agent. So all I had to do was ask her to send it because it was a little bit bigger press. And so I get a rejection from him. And this was 2018. I've been doing this from 2012 to 2018. And he says, so he rejects it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I mean, I've been rejected a lot, so I'm used to it. And then like a month later, my agent contacts me and she says, okay, this is weird, but the editor who rejected you said he's still thinking about your book. He's still thinking about it and he wants to talk to you about it. And some ideas he might have for you to revise it, and then he might look at it again. She said, I don't usually advise that because that's a revision without a contract, and that's like extra, that's extra work. So I said, well, I mean, he's gonna give me an hour of his time or whatever, so yeah, I'll talk to him. So I talked to him for like an hour, and he told me half of the time he spent telling stories about his life, the other, which I'm doing right now, I realize, but the other half, he really had good ideas, I thought, oh, yeah. And he had big structural changes that he wanted me to make. And I had this book in this like one way for a long time. So I was like, okay, so I said, I'm gonna try it. It was like changing a lot of the second half. So I went up to Derry Hollow again. It's great up there. And I was like, I'm gonna make all these changes while I'm up there. And I did that, came back, edited again, sent it to him, and he rejected it. However, it shortlisted for 3 awards after that to publish it. Shortlisted means it was a finalist, but it didn't actually win. But then I did get a publisher for it, and I think his feedback really helped. So I really stayed at it, which is a good just lesson. I just saw a friend of mine on Facebook just got a 3-book deal, and she has been in this for 20 years. She had been on the verge of giving up several times, and she said, but I didn't, and I just got a 3-book deal. So yeah, we do this, and I talk about this a lot in the Geeks Guide. We do this because we love it. We just love writing. Writing is its own love. If you can get published, that's great. That's like the whipped cream on top. But, we like other people to read our work. Anyway, so I've talked all about that, but that's to give you an idea of how open you kind of need to be, I think, to editing. So, you've revised and revised and revised. Maybe at this point, you might get a few beta editors to give you feedback. Ask them where it's working and where it's not. I'm really lucky I have my husband for this. We read each other's work. And it's good to ask other writers, but I actually also, in addition to my husband, I like to ask people who just read a lot, and I admire their reading tastes. And also if they're not like a hard-ass reader, but like a hard reader. They ask a lot of the books. So I had a couple friends do this, and my biggest question to them was, tell me where you feel like putting it down. That's what I want to know when you get bored with it. And I actually gave it to my best friend, which I say not to do, but my best friend is someone who I really trust to be honest with me, and she gave me a lot of good critique. And I also gave it to some other people. Anyway, also she comes from, her mother was a poet and stuff, so she's very honest. Anyway, and she's a theater person. So she gave me feedback, all this. So I was ready to do the first editing of it. This was before I sent it to the agent. So I revised it many times. And here are my editing tips. Okay, read it out loud. Now, you had your composition teachers telling you this in college, or English teachers telling you, read it out loud, or they would put you in groups and say, okay, everybody has to read their drafts out loud, and everyone hates doing that. And yeah, maybe reading out loud to people you may not like as much, but you have to read the piece out loud. There's just no question. I do it by myself. I hear my husband, doing it, like he gets up really early, and I get up in the morning and I hear him like reading his manuscript. It's the only way in the beginning that you will catch stuff. Reading out loud makes you attend to the words and the sentences in a way that you wouldn't do any other way. The other thing is you can see if it works on a sentence and sound level, which is also kind of for final editing. For example, do you have to catch your breath after you read a sentence? Not pause, but like, well, that might be a long sentence, and you might want to look. I'm not saying sometimes a long sentence is okay, but you look at it and go, gosh, that is really long. Maybe I should cut that into two things. Do you stumble over a phrase when you're reading it? Maybe it's not written well for sound. So sound is important. And by the way, start doing this really once you've done those structural changes, because if you do it before that, like you might do all these edits on a section you end up taking out. That's kind of not a great use of your time, unless you find that you're learning as you do that. So, okay, once you've done this, ask your beta readers or your teachers or your husband or your partner or your BFF if they notice if you have any stylistic habits, like certain words or phrases that you tend to use over and over. And other people can see this much better than you can. Based on what they see, use the find function in Word or whatever to look up all the instances of that phrase in your piece or your book and see if every time you find it, does it really need to be there? And I aim to cut this down by like 2/3 when I do this. Like, okay, so one of mine is though. Wendell Mayo turned me on to that. So you use though all the time, and you do not need to use it as much. And honestly, this was 20 years ago that he alerted me to this. This was a teacher of mine, and I still do it. I don't know, I just like that word. Anyway, but I always go in and take out 2/3 of the those. Also, using the find feature, you can, before the 90s, none of us could do this. Look for the following phrases because they can almost always be cut. Very, rather, quite, in fact, just, pretty, so, and that. These are all, most of these are modifiers that are kind of excess. They don't need to be there. Like if you say someone's very beautiful, okay? Well, you just don't need the very. Beautiful is beautiful, you really can't go above beautiful, right? Rather is the same way, quite. In fact is a placeholder. In fact, just, again, is kind of you can just take the word out. And probably not even need it. So I actually keep this list of words on my desk as a reminder, and I go through when I'm editing and do the find feature, and I look and see, can I cut that? Sometimes I need to leave it, but most of the time I can cut it. Okay, so this is where I get to talking about style guides. A few reading style guides can help, and that sounds like the most boring thing in the world, and most of them are, but not this one. This is a great style guide. It's called Dreyer's English. It's by an editor at Random House. He's edited a lot of famous writers. He's a very funny, witty guy, and he talks about being an editor what he looks for, how he edits. And this reads like just a nonfiction novel. It really does. It's a fun book to read. I'll read you some of and there's a few others like this that read really well. Chapter 1, the life-changing magic of tidying up your prose. Chapter 2, rules and non-rules. And that's where he points out that there are some rules that we think are rules, but they're really not. 67, assorted things to do and not do with punctuation. A little grammar is a dangerous thing. The realities of fiction. And then, and what he does too, he has a couple chapters where he says these are the most common errors that everybody makes. So look at these and see if you do them. Before I started my grad program, I can't believe I did this, but I really was not good at the whole it is. So you use the apostrophe for it is, and this is the possessive. For some reason, no one had really turned me on to the fact that I had it wrong until I was in graduate school. So, but once they did, I was like, oh, I'm in grad school, better get that right. So that was one of the things I really taught myself using style guides. Like, okay, I looked it up. So honestly, I highly recommend Dreyer's English. I bet they have it on the shelves here. I would be shocked if they didn't. He's just so funny, and he's a really great guy, actually. I follow him on Twitter. He's very funny. My favorite part of this book I will share is the Flannery O'Connor rule. Okay, the Flannery O'Connor flow chart for using should of, for saying should of. Instead of should have. This is the flow chart. So if you're Flannery O'Connor, you can say should have. Otherwise, you can't. That's his point with that. I just thought that was hilarious. I loved it. But also, if you're Dr. Seuss, you can get away with a lot of things. But basically, it should have. And of course, a lot of this grammar stuff. Get back in the frame. A lot of this grammar stuff, grammar changes, right? It really does. So you don't have to get too hung up about it. Just do the best you can. It's just looking up stuff. If you're like, I don't know if this is right or that's right, just look it up and you can fix it. Also, places so this is a great book and I really, really recommend it. Also, or just following him on Twitter because he's so funny. The Purdue Owl. Purdue University started a writing center in the 90s, and they just started developing all these resources. And then they put them all online. The Purdue Owl has saved my bacon so many times. It can answer any grammar question that you have. They have a handout on it. If you have to cite something, APA, Chicago style, MLA, just whatever you can think of, it's on the Purdue Owl. And we use it. I use it all the time. Most people who write use the Purdue Owl. Also, Mignon Fogarty, who is the grammar girl. She has great books. She has YouTube videos and a podcast. She's also really funny. I follow her on Twitter. And so I recommend her. If you have to learn grammar, right, do it in a fun way. Don't bore yourself to tears. Plus, if you're bored reading a style guide, you're not going to retain it. Finally, Ariel Anderson is a former student of mine, and she is an editor now. She also has a podcast on editing and being edited. I have been on this podcast talking about how much I love editors, because I do. And she's also had a lot of other cool writers on there. Okay, so read style guides to kind of get in the habit of knowing, knowing the whole it is thing and, all that stuff. Also, if you want, so at this point, you've read the style guides, you've read through it out loud, you've corrected the errors, read it aloud again. It'll be much cleaner now, won't take you as long, still will take you a bit. Of course, if it's shorter, it shouldn't take you as long. Make any last minute edits. Now you're ready to send it to an agent or an editor. Now, they expect copy to be this clean, okay? Now, if you're self-publishing, you need to hire an editor at this point because it's worth every penny. Traditional publishers, no matter how much the author has edited and the acquisitions editor has edited, traditional publishers will still put your work through several more edits. So if you want your self-published work to be as good as that, you need to pay someone who's a professional editor to do it for you. And they will, and they're very good. Ariel is one of them. I know lots of others, contact me, I can refer you. Is it cheap? No. Is it out of control expensive? I would say it's worth it. And that way you can be assured, if you're self-publishing, that this book is going to be as good as it can be. People are going to be able to read it. There's not going to be some weird phrasing or something that's going to take them out of the flow of the story, which they don't want. You all know as readers, what do you hate? Something that takes you out of the flow of the story. And bad editing can do that. So I have written 8 books. I've worked with numerous copy editors. And so that's how I know this is really true. Before then, I would have said, before I had this experience, I'd be like, oh yeah, editors are great, editors are good. No, editors are vital. Editors have made my work much better than it was on its own. And I'm someone who's been writing for 40 years. Yeah?
How do you go about finding an editor?
That you want to pay for? Okay, so Ariel is one. I know some freelance editors as well I can hook you up with. You can also Google them. There's some places on Facebook where they gather. Like there's something on Facebook called Editor's Back Room. And now this is where they kind of congregate to talk about, their editing and stuff like that. They don't use anyone's name or anything like that. But it's where you might go to find an editor. Mostly they'll ask each other questions. Like they'll ask, they'll ask editing questions, or they'll be like, this writer is using this word, and what should I do about that? Or they might say they want me to pay them this much, and I want them to pay me this much. Anyway, but Editor's Back Room on Facebook. But you can really find them. Also, the back of Poets and Writers magazine is another good place. There's classifieds in the back, and there's a lot of editors there. All of these people will be great. Ariel's a great editor. Okay, so, yes?
When you say it's creative stuff, it might be useful for what you're talking about. They work by the hour.
Yes, they work by the hour. Editors will do different things for you for different prices. Okay, if you want someone to help you with a revision before a final edit, depending on how long your work is, they'll go by the word count. So they might say for a 65,000 word book, I will read it for $400 and give you $400 to $500. It depends on how established the editor is. I'll give you an editorial letter from that. That is it should be at least 2 pages, double spaced. Like, here's what I would suggest, okay? And that's what I get from my editors at traditional publishers. I've gotten it. I was actually in a novel workshop last year, and I got it from the novel teacher. So it's like a letter. It's what I give my students all the time when I read their work. I write them a letter saying, here's what's working, here's what I think you could do. So there's that, and that'll usually be, depending on how established the editor is, $400 to $600 for a long piece. However, once you do that and you make the changes, that's a really good question. Editors will charge between $30 and $40 an hour, and they can usually edit between 5 and 10 pages an hour. That's line editing. So that's not the revision. That's going through, because when they're reading for the broader editorial letter, they're not going through and going IT, they're just looking at the big picture. But when they're actually line editing or copy editing, that's going to take them a little longer, and that'll cost a little more. So if you are going to actually publish it and put it out in the world, I still recommend that it's worth it. I had friends, and this is one way for you to, one way to look at it. I had friends who were self-publishing a novel that I thought was pretty good, but they came to me, and I read it and kind of gave them some developmental suggestions as a favor for friends. We're no longer friends, but anyway, it's a whole other story. And then they came back to me and they said they hired someone to do their website for them. And in doing the website, the person had to read the novel. And the web person said, I think you need some edits on this, some like copy editing. I'm willing to do it for $500. That's actually a bargain for as long as this book was like 65 cents. And it was pretty well written, really was, but it needed editing. And so my friend was like, I'm not gonna pay that. I can do that myself. No, you can't. You can't, you're not an editing professional. And when they finally published the book, you could tell, it wasn't terrible. I still thought it was, but but also when you think about it, I'm like, you're not gonna pay this person who's professionally trained at least $20 an hour to edit your book when that's what you make in your role. This person was a teacher. I'm like, at least. I'm like, editing, if you come away from this with one thing, it's that editing is an art. Actually, I'm not an editor. I mean, I'm pretty good at editing my own work and like at a certain level. But man, I admire editors so much. They have this way, the ones that I've worked with, at honing in and write what needs write on what needs development, or write on like, you're not as clear as you could be here, or and they bring my work to the next level. And I don't know, I think it's really an art. I think it comes from a lot of experience. So the more trained or experienced editor that you get, it is going to cost a little more. That's because they've been trained. The other thing is that you want to look for in an editor is that there's something called the Editorial Foundation of America. And I think it's called that. You can Google it, something like that. And that's where editors can go and take some online classes they get a credential from that. And so if your editor is trained, has an EFA training behind them, you know that they've been trained in certain ways. So that's, so either they have a ton of experience or they have. Ariel Anderson was a writing student at UCA, graduated from our writing program, was a technical writer for some years, and then did the editorial certificate program at the University of Washington in Seattle. Some people do that. You can get editing certificates either from EFA or from certain University of Chicago, University of Seattle has programs. Anyway, you want to look for someone who has some background. But if they have that background, they're going to be good and it's going to be worth it. Other questions? That was a good question. Okay, well, happy editing.